Well, um, good morning and afternoon. I guess it's afternoon for all time zones now. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining the Water Hub for one of our communications workshops. We're really excited to be talking, Zaki and I are really excited to be talking to you all today about how we can tailor our messages to different audiences. So I'm going to just give us a quick overview of what we're going to cover today, and then Zakia, myself, and our colleague Jessica will introduce ourselves, and then we'll get into it. Um, so we're going to spend about 30 minutes on a presentation where we'll be covering just some basics around kind of Audience 101 and some basics around narrative change, and then going through the three variables that you can mix up to adapt your message to talk to different groups of people. And we'll give some examples from the field as well. And then we're also going to do, and then after that first half an hour, we're going to have a group activity. We're actually going to, as a group, go through our audience profile worksheet together for about 10 minutes just to get folks kind of in the zone with it. And then we'll end and hopefully have about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A as well. So let me pass it over to Zakia.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Zakia Taylor. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm the communications manager at the Water Hub. My background is in rural organizing, rural political organizing, and environmental studies. And I'm very happy to see everyone in the chat coming in from all of the places around the country. I'll pass it to Sarah.
Great, thanks. And my name is Sarah Bucci. I use she, her pronouns as well. I'm based in Denver, Colorado, and I'm the Water Hub's Director of Strategic Communications. And my career has been working in environmental organizing and advocacy. So I've worked on campaigns in like probably 15 different states over the last 15 years. And then we also have our colleague Jessica, who's going to pop on, who's manning the chat and Q&A to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jessica Jewell. I'm the digital director at Water Hub. Happy to be with you all. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based outside of Los Angeles in Tonga territory. And yeah, I'll be here watching the chat. Please drop any questions you have in the Q&A, and I'll make sure to facilitate them when we have some time at the end for discussion. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. Jessica is going to be dropping resources that we mentioned throughout the training in the chat, but just know this is being recorded and we'll be sharing via email after the training, the slides, the recording, and all the resources that we talk about today.
Thanks so much, Sarah. So before we start exploring our audiences, let's first talk about the stories that engage them. So I'd like to reference this 3-layered waves model created by our friends at Narrative Initiative and Reframe, which helps us visualize how stories become ingrained in culture. On the surface, we have stories, the narration of events that we've personally experienced. Stories by nature are relatable, they're accessible, and they're personal. And when similar stories are shared multiple times over time, that collection of stories starts to represent something much deeper, a narrative. And these narratives become more deeply ingrained into our culture, which shapes our values and our worldviews, becoming these broad insights into our shared community and identity. I'll use their example about sharks. We're all familiar with the Jaws archetype about sharks. Multiple stories have been told about swimmers being attacked by sharks, which has created this deeper narrative that they're dangerous or they're man-eating predators. And the value or worldview that we collectively hold about sharks indicates something a little bit deeper, like the battle between humans and nature, or the fear of the unknown. In truth, the narratives that we've created about sharks aren't actually accurate to their behavior. Sharks don't seek out humans to attack, they're just defensive of their territory. And if we wanted to create a new narrative about sharks, our storytelling would reflect real-life accuracy as an alternative to that currently dominant narrative. So when we're thinking about our audiences, we should think about the stories that the audience is already responsive to, the narratives that those stories have created, and the values and worldviews that the audience may hold. And with that insight, we can tell better stories that impact the audience and reshape that dominant narrative by presenting alternative solutions. I'll pass it to Sarah.
So your narrative project has to reach an intended audience to have an impact. So by audience, we mean the individuals or groups whose behavior you want to change or mobilize in order to achieve your goal. And it's really important to get kind of specific and granular about who you're really trying to reach, because that's going to help you tailor your message to make it the most impactful that you can. So there's a couple of different ways you can think about kind of slicing and dicing who your audience is. This can be through shared demographic traits like age, gender, language. You can also be geography. Are you trying to reach people in a particular city or region? Are you trying to reach folks who live in urban, suburban, or rural communities? And it can also be by where people are getting their information and what communications channels they use. Another way I also like to think about this is understanding if you're trying to persuade or mobilize your audience. Are you reaching out to people who you know already agree with you on an issue, but you really want them to take action? And so you've got to get them excited to get involved in an issue or campaign. Or are you reaching folks who maybe haven't thought about an issue a lot or don't have a baked in opinion yet? And so you want to reach them and persuade them to be on your side. And once you know who you're trying to reach, you want to use some tools to really think through and understand your audience's wants and needs. We have a resource that we're going to share a little bit later called our audience profile worksheet, which asks questions to help us kind of get at these, to understand who our audience trusts, where they get their information. And that way you can use the best framing and imagery and words to move them to action. A best practice here is to think about real people you might know who share the characteristics of your target audience. This might even be you yourself, so you can kind of put yourself in that shoes and think about the things that you care about. And so we can use this to make educated guesses. We can also use public opinion research to help inform this exercise. So I'm going to use an example about how the Water Hub might look at some of our polling data and look at some of the demographic breakdowns on particular answers to see if it can help us understand some trends that might inform the way we develop our messages. So on this slide, we have a question that we asked in our annual voter poll. That this is from our one last year, but I thought it was a good example. And in this chart, we can see we asked voters to rank 5 different goals for US foreign policy from most to least important. And overall, we saw across all registered voters surveyed that protecting the health of people and the environment were the top choices, top choices to be selected number 1. But when we look at when we look at kind of the demographics of 2 different demographics, or a demographic and a political ideology, excuse me, we can see that the answer is a little bit different. So in this example, we see 34% of voters who ID'd as Democrats and 30% of people aged 18 to 34 ranked protecting the environment as the number 1 priority. And that was just slightly more ahead of health. Whereas only 14% of the voters surveyed who were Republicans and 20% of people over the age of 55 ranked the environment as that number 1. On the flip side, more Republican ID voters, so 34%, and then 41% of people over the age of 55 ranked health as that number 1 priority. So what that shows me is basically these are both like pretty popular goals. And if you're trying to reach the broadest swath, talking about that health message is going to kind of hit all of these demographics. But if I'm trying to target younger or more democratic voters around the Farm Bill and farm policy I'm working on, I might lean a little bit more into that, or feel more comfortable leaning more into that environmental message. Whereas if I'm really trying to reach older voters, older people, or more Republican leaning voters, I might really lean more into the message around how our policy is going to protect health.
So once you've profiled your audience, you then want to tailor your message for them. You want to be intentional in your message, thinking about who you're trying to reach, where you're trying to reach them, and how your audience already resonates with the topic you're crafting your message around. You also want to think about who you are as a brand or an organization while you're crafting your message, and how you can share that message without sacrificing your authenticity. Trying too hard to tailor a message to your audience can come off as inauthentic or pandering. Think politicians doing Instagram challenges or TikTok trends. While that can be a valid way to connect with a younger audience, it can come off as inauthentic from an elected official, especially those that don't already work in the interest of the target audience. As Sarah said earlier, there are three main variables that can really impact how your audience receives your messaging. That's frame, tone, and messenger. And a good tailored message that resonates with your audience and rallies the most support should naturally exist in the middle of that Venn diagram. So next, Sarah and I will take you through those three variables.
Great. So the first thing that you can mix up, depending on who you're trying to talk to, is the framing of your message. A frame is the lens through which we understand the world. So we like to use the glasses analogy here, like wearing glasses or contacts or having LASIK or having 20/20 vision. Our eyes are all a little bit different, and we all have different lenses on. And the lenses that we have on, which are shaped by our environment, our upbringing, those impact how we take in and filter new information. And so what we really want to try to do is lean into the frames that are going to put our audience in the best possible state to work with us and avoid the messages or the frames that land us in a place that's going to have us fighting against the current or feel kind of counterproductive. So we have some examples of some different framing that you can think about how you talk about an issue. So you can put it in terms of human rights or public health, recreation, infrastructure. One shorthand exercise that I like to think about is, okay, if I have an ask or a campaign or a policy, and I want to think about like what frame I'm trying to use, think about like, how would I name a piece of legislation and how could I change the name of like the bill of my message to change how it's framed and how people are going to perceive it. So some like real life examples from this. I know we've been working with a lot of groups who are implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law. The longhand of that name is the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act that was passed 2 years ago. And this is a really boring name. Like it's got the word infrastructure. It's like just says what it is. Like the Biden administration clearly had a communication strategy where they were like, we want this to seem like not super political, not controversial, and they wanted it to seem technocratic. They wanted it to seem bipartisan. So they just like put that in the name they were using. They said, we're going to call it the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And I think that worked in this case. Versus another bill that's been introduced, and this obviously does different things, but the Environmental Justice for All Act. Now, the EJ for All Act is named that specifically designed because it wants to appeal to progressives and put people in kind of a different headspace. It's a real marker of like what's possible in terms of prioritizing justice in our work. And so you can see those pieces of legislation do different things, but the way that they're named really impacts how people perceive what they are and what they do.
Secondly, we're talking about tone. Tone lends both personality and credibility to a message. A tone can invoke an emotional response or provide context past what simply words can provide. And a well-suited tone establishes a connection with the audience, making the message relatable and trustworthy, or can even motivate the audience to jump into action. Think about some of the campaigns you've worked on. Did you present your information factually or playfully? Were you serious, Were you rightfully outraged? The words and language you choose for a message can encourage the audience to feel the same way. And different audiences respond uniquely to different tones. For example, this paid ad against Theresa May had two versions, one that was created to invoke an emotional reaction, and one with the information presented a lot more factually. And while the emotional version garnered about 1,000 views, the factual version was viewed more than 5,000 times. To me, the conclusion that we can draw is that a political audience may like their information presented without an emotional plea. This kind of like A/B testing and playing with different versions of language can also give you more insight into the tones that your audience responds to more enthusiastically.
And lastly, the thing you can change up is who is the messenger. Messengers matter, and they should be trusted, authentic, and if possible, reinforce the frame that you want your audience to be in. This might be you and your organization as the messenger. And so you want to think about, we talked about kind of that sweet spot in that Venn diagram where you're leaning into what your audience wants to hear and how they want to hear it, but also remaining true to your organization's values, brands, and coming across as authentic. But here you want to think about who your audience will listen to, who do they trust? Would it make sense to engage artists and cultural movers and shakers? Or do you want to really demonstrate that there's a wide array of public support, broad support for an issue? And so you want to engage messengers from a bunch of different perspectives. This also, again, might be you and your organization. So just for example, the same like public health message around the importance of access to water, it's going to resonate a little bit differently when it comes to a politician versus an economist versus an advocate versus a nurse or a doctor. And as Zakia said, we've like all seen when politicians like try to put themselves kind of like in that firsthand of like directly impacted community members and it like lends false. Sometimes it works really well, and it all just depends a little bit on does your audience kind of already like you? Do they find that kind of thing endearing or not? And so that's like important. This like important kind of spectrum to juggle to figure out, okay, who's the right messenger? Who's going to resonate with my audience, and who's going to feel authentic? Okay. So now we're going to go into a couple of examples from the field, as well as talking a little bit about messaging across ideology. So I'll hand it over to Zakia to give our case study on dude wipes, which is admittedly hilarious.
Yeah, let's take a look at dude wipes. And so dude wipes are what they sound like, right? They are wipes marketed towards dudes, marketed towards men, with the vision to quote unquote win the war against toilet paper. They're flushable wipes that are slightly bigger and come with this sort of machismo about them. And their framing is that men need wipes that are bigger and more comfortable than toilet paper. And they use that narrative of macho man to connect with their audience. In their messaging, they use everyday, average male spokespeople to come off authentically and use a very crass and irreverent tone to reflect that audience. The language that they use is even a bit jokey to invoke a more laid-back feel to their products. Now, there might not actually be a need for gendered flushable wipes, especially because they aren't actually flushable. But they are a great example of what a solid frame, tone, and message can do for a campaign.
Thanks, Zakia. We know this one will rile up the water systems people. Okay. The next thing we want to look at is, are you trying to talk inside or outside of the echo chamber? If you're talking with funders or legislators, you might want your message to come across a little bit more buttoned up and relying on things like fact sheets and testimonials. These groups tend to care more about traditional press. But when we're trying to move people outside of the echo chamber, we really want to meet people where they're at. And so I wanted to share two examples of when the Water Hub has tried to get outside of this echo chamber and have more of these online conversations. So this first example on the left, and I'm going to share this video in just a second, our colleague Jessica, who's chatting with you all, just shout out to her. She worked on this incredible campaign where us, as well as our partners at Climate Nexus and Resource Media, worked with content creators across different platforms to create messages and videos explaining and getting people excited about the Inflation Reduction Act, the benefits from it that had passed last year. And I think this is a really good example because while the team behind this campaign did a really good job of crafting kind of the specific points they wanted to make sure people hit, they really reached out to the creators that were going to have the audience that they were trying to reach and really put a lot of trust in the creators and let them have a lot of freedom to do what they do, because we know that they know their own audiences really well. So I'm going to share this video. I can get my mouse to work. Hold on one second.
Hey, quick question for you. What's something essential that we don't talk enough about? H2O. Yes, H2O, you should have known about the help sent to Colorado. 4 B's to Lake Powell, protect Lake Mead, 40 million in need of fresh water to drink. Just think! If you don't want water protection, then what are you doing? What are your objectives? It's time to get loud. Do you hear what I'm saying? Let's not flush the work down the...
All right. Thanks for indulging. That was a really cute one. And shout out to Sebastian. I think Jessica will be sharing the link to that TikTok video in the chat. He's a great partner. And then on the right, we see a GIF that was created by a group and partner called Into Action. They create memes and GIFs to try to reach a younger crowd online about our issues. We've worked with them to create a bank of content that's open source. And so I think Jessica will link that as well. So if you're looking for fun short snips or memes to post on your own sites, this is certainly a place you can go. But this was a little bit of a kind of new terrain for the Water Hub. So in this meme, it's a little bit snarkier, looking at kind of the like making fun of big oil and their lies. We usually tend to, like, our brand and our personality for our organization tends to be, we want it to be playful, accessible, but also informative. And so leaning a little bit on the kind of sarcastic, sardonic humor isn't something that we always do, but we try to branch into a little bit to make sure that we're reaching new and different people where this type of message might resonate. So lastly, before we get into our activity, and we're like doing exactly right on time, which is always very exciting, is thinking about how we talk about water across ideology. And the really good news is that water is a top concern for basically everyone in the United States. There's a annual poll done by Gallup on the environment that asks people their concerns. It's been running for 25 years at this point, and concerns about water pollution and safety are the #1 concern for voters, regardless of any demographic and political ID. And so it's just like nice to know we're starting from kind of a place of common ground. We also find that water, talking about the impacts of things like fossil fuel pollution and climate change in the context of water, is a nice way to bridge the gap, because the opinion around this is less polarized. So, you know, for example, from this Gallup poll, 14% of Republican-leaning voters said they were worried a very great deal about climate change, is much less than Democratic voters. There's quite a bit of gap there in terms of the intensity of concern. But that same group, about 40%, are very worried about pollution in rivers, lakes, and streams and their drinking water. And so we can see there's a much smaller gap between the concern levels and what your kind of political persuasion is when it comes to looking at water quality.
So I come from rural organizing work, and one of the things that I've learned very deeply is that rural does not just mean redneck and Republican. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to travel to a rural narrative convening hosted by Narrative Initiative, where we talked collectively about the helpful and harmful narratives about rural places. The redneck and Republican narrative doesn't accurately reflect the diversity of people who have historically lived in rural places, many of whom are left-leaning or progressive, or come from communities of color that have deep roots in those areas. Rather than leaning into these stereotypes, we have an opportunity to tell stories that reflect shared values, that celebrate other stories about rural places, stories of community care, of civil rights victories, and a very rich history of mutual aid.
Great. And I think it really brings it back to the most basic tenet is that you're going to get much further talking about issues around shared values rather than technocratic policy or loading up on stats and data. While we know we won't and don't need to win everyone over, it can be really helpful to start with these values that we share. And one example of tapping into a narrative around opportunity. So there's a great group that we love called the Opportunity Agenda. And so I'm going to quote from their communications toolbook here. Americans simultaneously hold in their minds great hope and pride about what our country has to offer and real disappointment about what we fail to do as a nation. So addressing both sets of beliefs is important to engage people. We can talk about opportunity to mean equal access to basic human rights, to have the opportunity to reach our full potential, the opportunity to solve problems together. Some other shared values that cross that ideological brain block can be around voice, that we should all have a say in the decisions that affect us. In community, as Zakia mentioned, we share responsibility for each other and for the common good. And also in security, we should all have the tools to meet our basic needs and the needs of our families. And so I'm going to pass it back to Zakia. We're going to try something new where we do like a group activity before we do our Q&A.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'll be first reading out the activity, and then, as she said, we'll move into the scenario, introduce our audience profile worksheet, and work on this activity together. So the activity, we're working to pass a permanent universal low-income water bill assistance program. In this activity, we'll be using our audience profile worksheet to profile one priority constituency of a lightly fictionalized member of Congress whose support we want to secure. So here's the scenario. Our member of Congress and their district, a newly elected Democrat, is in a hotly contested swing district. She's a practicing pediatrician and the former state representative who ran on a platform of practical progressivism and is also the first Latina member of Congress from her state. The district itself is 40% Latinx, working class. The largest employers are in agriculture and oil and gas. It includes the exurbs of a major metropolitan area. And the constituency will be focusing on our 30 to 55-year-old moms who have moved further from the metro area to find affordable housing for their families. So now that we've gone through that scenario, we're going to step into the shoes of the audience with our audience profile worksheet. And this tool was designed to help the user immerse themselves in the perspective of their target demographic to gain a deeper understanding of what matters to them, what resonates with them, and what kinds of communication will most deeply resonate. If you fit in this demographic, you can use yourself. And if you don't, then think about the people in your life who are and what matters to them. So for the first question, what sort of things do they care about? Who is this group of people, the 30 to 55-year-old moms? What are they invested in? I see Kate says kids, their family's health, education, health, safety, lots of health of their families, saving money and finances, affordability, housing, healing and justice. Amazing answers. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but we do have a very fancy whiteboard, and Sarah will be typing your answers on the screen so that we can all share collectively. Safe locations, grocery bills, basic expenses, a brighter future for the next generation, family, neighborhoods, education. Fantastic answers, fantastic participation. And who do they trust? Who are they looking towards? Who do they want to hear from, or what sort of messengers are they listening to when they have something to say? Other moms, absolutely. I see community leaders, family, friends, other parents, instructors, school members, other teachers. I see Instagram influencers. And where are they finding their information from? I see a lot of social media.
Can we get more specific than that? Like what social media platforms?
Mhm. Overwhelmingly Facebook. I see some Instagram as well. Suburb or HOA Facebook groups, that's a really great one. A lot of good conversations happen in those Facebook groups. And talk radio, NPR, Nextdoor. Nextdoor is a big one. TikTok and YouTube. Interesting, interesting. So these are some of the questions that are featured on our audience profile worksheet. Again, excuse me, Jessica will be sharing that in the chat. And we really encourage you to use this to sort of plan out what your audience is resonating with and how you can create content and communicate with them in a way that really resonates. Ultimately, being intentional in this way will both aid you in crafting that content and strengthen the connection to your cause or organization.
Great. I hope people could see the whiteboard. We were testing this out, but that is,
They can.
oh,
Fantastic.
wonderful. Okay. I'm gonna just get the slides back on. I'm really testing my own technological purpose. All right, we did it. So next up, we're gonna go into our Q&A portion. Oh, hold on. There we go. But while we're doing that, and we have like a full 20 minutes for this, which I think is great. I did want to just prompt before we get into that, and I know people like to leave and jump off early. two links, QR codes here. We'll share these links in the chat as well and in the follow-up email. But on the left, the orange QR code is to a survey. We really want and value your feedback. It helps us think about what trainings we want to offer next, as well as just how we can improve our resources and our webinars. And then on the right, at the end of October, we're going to be doing our next workshop, which will be led by our colleague Nicole Lampe on infrastructure messaging that taps into voter values. And this one will be going over the data from our latest voter poll, which we released last month, and doing some messaging best practices. So just want to leave these up while we get into our Q&A session, so folks have a chance to fill those out. But yeah, I'll hand it over to Zakia and Jessica to kind of look through the chat and the Q&A box here.
I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A just yet, but given that we have plenty of space, feel free to drop in your questions or in the chat, and we're happy to source any kind of wisdom we can from the room.
I think it might be a first where we don't have any questions. Does that mean that we just did a really good job?
Sounds like it. No questions? No lingering thoughts? Oh, I see one.
Yes, we have one from Molly Daniels. Says, what resources would we recommend folks to use when they aren't sure about responses to the audience worksheet?
And I see a follow-up, for example, when they aren't sure about who their audience trusts. That's a really good question. I think I would lean into really honing who your audience is and thinking about who you know, who also reflects that audience. I think that personal experience can definitely be very illuminating. And so I would really lean into, the relationships that you have with others to get some insight. I would reach out to maybe partner organizations that do work with the constituency that you're looking to communicate with, for sure. Yeah, I would lean into personal experience and both working with others who do know the audience that you're looking to talk to better than you may.
We have another couple questions in here, if it's okay to pivot. One is from Sarah Guan. I'm sorry if I butchered that. They're asking that they'd like to learn about our process for creating an audience profile. Like, how do we go from I want to speak to people or open to my message to something more actionable? So how to develop that?
Good question. Starting with who you want to speak to also illuminates what sort of questions or compelling issues that group has. So say the constituency that we worked with, the 30 to 55-year-old moms, knowing who they are and investigating or researching deeper into the conversations they're already having with each other, maybe by scoping out a local Facebook group, and really getting a sense of the issues that they're already attuned to, and the things that they're already having conversations about, the things that are already on their mind. I think that also tells you more about what sort of action items you can ask for that both align with their interest and align with your organization's cause. So it's all about getting to know the audience first, and then getting a sense of what sort of actions they'll be interested in.
If I can interject a little bit too, Zakia, I think there's kind of I think about this in like two ways. So one is if you have a campaign where your goal is to pass a policy or you're trying to reach a certain type of community get involved in a program, that can help guide you. But you can also, a flip side and a way to think about this is thinking about your organization's audience and where you engage with people already. So you can think about, okay, we know we have like a newsletter list, and we've got the people who follow us on our social media channels, and we've got, as just two examples, are the people who are members of our organization or donors to our organization. So you can also kind of work backwards from that. I think one thing Zakia alluded to was, and I say this to try to get to know who that audience is a little bit. There's good like data analytics tools for some of these things that you can use to just understand, like, okay, here are the demographics, like we look at, here are the demographics of the people who follow us on different kind of platforms. And then we look at what type of content is most resonating with those folks through what's, doing kind of like monthly reports on what's getting the most engagement. And that helps us understand, okay, here's the type of content that our audience, which here's what we know about them, really likes. And then it can also help us adapt to like the messages that we think are really important, but maybe aren't getting enough traction to try to come at them from a different place. So I think there's ways you can do a little bit of research, like surveying your donors or your membership to kind of ask some of these questions and understand, or just kind of looking at those engagement metrics and understanding, okay, our audience on Instagram, we know this about them through what types of video, some of it's like skewed a bit because obviously like the algorithm overlords like change everything. But I think that's just like another way you can think about it too. That's a little bit more on the marketing side than the kind of campaign communication side.
That might, you may have touched on this, Sarah and Zakia, but just wanted to put a finer point from this question from Rebecca, who was asking that one of our slides had a list of general types of data sources, and if we have any other ideas for other sources we've found effective to identify sympathetic audiences.
That's a really good question. Particular sources to identify sympathetic audiences. Data sources, actually, Jessica, can I roll this question to you? Because I think that you might have better ideas than I do.
I mean, Sarah encapsulated it, but I do think like identifying, like looking across channels, like you were saying, Sarah, to see, perhaps you're getting bigger and more engagement on one channel than another. I'm thinking social in particular may say a lot about what's resonating, not just from an engagement point of view, but you might see something fall flat on Facebook, but rise to the top on Instagram. And digging into your demographics on those platforms should be illuminating. So say, for example, anytime you post about something, let's say aspirational versus more divisive, like depending on the tone, outperforms on one platform than another. Looking into who's on those platforms, you're like, okay, great, we know that this message resonates with people between the ages of 25 and 30. So like leaning into that, depending on what your project or your campaign is. Other than that, I would assume that, you provided quite a few resources, but yeah, looking at voter file data perhaps, or, other sources to see, where people are distributed demographically and kind of their values, and, to help guide your process. But yeah, so I hope that is helpful.
One other thing, and feel free to reach out to us at the Water Hub too, if you're kind of having some quandaries around this, a particular issue or a particular audience, because we might be able to share some like more, this is all kind of very general advice, so some more specifics. We can look at some of our past polling data, and this will be on a national level, so it won't be so specific to like your region or state necessarily, though there might be resources like that that we know about, but can look at the kind of overall support for particular issues. So maybe something that you're thinking about, we've asked about, and so we can kind of go in and look at some of the more granular kind of like demographic breakdowns of how people answered those questions. So definitely feel free to we don't have every answer for sure, but and I think you should trust your gut and your knowledge of your own community and your own audiences that you're talking to on a regular basis. I feel like you probably know a lot, but yeah, feel free to reach out to us too to see if there's anything we've done that might be helpful.
Thank y'all so much. I do see a question from Cindy. Did we do the fourth box in the fancy whiteboard? I was curious about the blockers. Just to go back, that fourth question on the audience profile worksheet is what is keeping the constituency from being supportive? And I don't think that we did that just for time's sake, but we can explore if the folks here would like to explore. And then another question from Kate. Do you have any suggestions to get around the algorithms so your messages are being seen by more people besides paying? So unfortunately, on most social websites now, it is very pay to play, pay to be seen, pay for widespread engagement. But that doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities for organic engagement. That doesn't mean that you can't play with your messaging to make it more interesting or broad or applicable to more people. I am personally a big fan of memes as a way to both educate and interest and intrigue. I think that they are very useful tools for crafting content around an issue in a way that still feels approachable and sort of naturally aligns itself in the sort of feed of a lot of social media platforms. A meme is more warm and approachable, and people are curious about a joke or something funny that they've seen, something familiar that they've seen in a different format. And so I would encourage you to play with your content to up your organic engagement. But as far as the algorithms and paying, that is an unfortunate reality of our socials these days. Any other questions? Any interest in going back to the audience profile worksheet and looking at that fourth question? Oh, fun. So, Sarah, is it possible we can pull up the whiteboard again?
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
I gotta do.
And just to recap that fourth question, it's what is keeping the constituency from being supportive? So some of the questions we can use to think about that are, or place ourselves in the shoes of the constituency, are saying, I worry that, or it frustrates me when X, Y, and Z. So what are some of the things that this group of 30 to 55-year-old moms who have moved just outside of the metro area are concerned about that may keep them from being supportive? I see cost, tax bills, more on costs.
You can also think about this as like physical limitations. So time and energy. Okay, I just saw it pop up in the chat. So I was like, that's a big one if I'm thinking about my my peers.
Time and energy, yes. Daycare, that's a great one.
Mm-hmm.
Kaylin, can you elaborate on what you mean by fairness? That's really interesting. Kate, I see not understanding the basics about water, how it gets to your tap, etc. Some of the more technical aspects of water, absolutely. Negative messaging, like opposition messaging or potentially misinformation. Distrust of government. Oh, fairness as in who should qualify for reduced cost. So maybe a personal or implicit bias there, general mistrust, misinformation via Facebook. Great answers.
Yeah. I think this is like an underrated question to think about in our as we're making communications plans. I think I'm even suspect to not think about this in great depth, but I think it's really helpful because it kind of understands like, okay, what are these are some of the frames like if you like you know that you can put yourself in that kind of make you, I guess the analogy I was using was like swimming upstream. Um, but oh, there's a lot going in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, there's a total like Kaylin, I like to talk about this as the myth of a meritocracy, but there's like a whole and this is not saying everybody believes this, but there are certainly people who believe that those kind of like government programs in general, like the handout kind of and myth of meritocracy. So I totally see what you're saying. I know that that's not what you yourself are saying. But I think it's important to understand when we're looking at this, you know, this is just one issue of a campaign, but that's totally something that we have thought about when we've thought about messaging, and actually on just like a real life case study on this. So there was a bill that was introduced last week to provide additional funding to this program, this low income water assistance program, that we're working with a number of partners on to pass. And one of the things that we found through some of our message testing and polling and other things is that talking broadly about the issue of affordability, the fact that water rates are rising really fast, they're rising faster than all their utilities, that water is unaffordable, which means it's like more than 4% of a household income for like almost 1 in 3 households, and kind of universalizing that problem around just the issue of affordability and taking it out of that lens of personal responsibility and into like an institutional infrastructure problem is the strategy that we have been taking to kind of address that. So hopefully that's like a helpful example.
I see some answers, peer pressure as well. Some of the more social dynamics of why someone may not be as oriented to a cause. Oh, another question from Kate. Any recommendations for good polling services that are affordable?
This is a good question. I might need to follow up. This is not my like area of expertise. But so Kate, I may send you a follow-up email when I talk to some colleagues, but we use, I mean, personally, we use where the Water Hub is a part of Climate Nexus, and we have a polling team that does work with outside partners. I can't remember exactly how much it costs. But yeah, if other people have ideas of groups that they've worked with that they've liked, I mean, there are a lot of good ones, and I just like cannot think of anything off the top of my head, which I'm sorry about. But we also, one thing that we do, if you have questions that you're curious about too, obviously doing something that might be more local might be more helpful. We do like a national annual poll. We just did our one for this year, but if there are questions you have, like send them to us, because we often get asked like, hey, can you ask about this or that issue? And we include them in our annual surveys so that those results are available to everyone. So if a broad kind of national question would be helpful for something you're working on. But yeah, in the meantime, if people have other, it can be quite expensive. So I understand that it's challenging. There's also things you can do that are kind of like not non-scientific, but doing like surveying of your membership, or kind of trying to do some focus groups with like very engaged people that are already, part of your networks, are kind of DIY ways that you might be able to get some expressions too.
I see folks connecting in the chat too. I love to see it.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're kind of at time, so I think we can hang out in case that anyone has any other burning thoughts, but please fill out the survey and tell us what we did well and what we can improve. And we'll share all these resources with you all via email.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.